I never thought a furnace filter would become the centerpiece of the most absurd legal battle in suburban Colorado history. But here we are, sitting in a courtroom because my HOA president thought she knew more about HVAC maintenance than actual certified technicians. It started on a Tuesday morning in January when I found a bright yellow violation notice stuck to my front door in Boulder Creek, a planned community just outside Denver, where the houses all looked like they were designed by the same architect, having a beige fever dream. The notice was from Deborah Martinez, our HOA president, informing me that I was violating community standards by changing my furnace filters too frequently. Yes, you read that right. Too frequently. I stood there in my driveway, still holding my coffee mug, rereading the notice 3 times because surely I had misunderstood. The letter stated that according to HOA records, I had purchased and installed new furnace filters 8 times in the past 4 months, which was deemed excessive and wasteful according to some obscure clause in our community guidelines about resource conservation. There was a fine attached, $500 for the first offense, with escalating penalties if I continued this reckless behavior. My name is Marcus Morrison, and I had moved to Boulder Creek 2 years ago after landing a software engineering job at a tech startup in Denver. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent backyard and a 2-car garage. The HOA seemed reasonable enough during the buying process, with their talk about maintaining property values and community standards. I should have known better. I walked back inside and called my buddy Jake, who had warned me about HOAs when I first mentioned buying in Boulder Creek. He answered on the second ring. "Dude, you are not going to believe this," I said, still staring at the yellow notice. "The HOA just fined me for changing my furnace filters too much," Jake laughed. "What? That is insane. How is that even possible? Apparently there is some conservation clause and they have been tracking my filter purchases. This is unreal. Man, I told you." HOAs are just bored people looking for ways to exert power over their neighbors. What are you going to do? I had no idea at that moment, but I knew I was not paying that fine. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA bylaws, searching for this mysterious conservation clause. After an hour of reading through mind-numbing legalese, I found it buried in Section 47, subsection D. The clause stated that homeowners must engage in reasonable resource conservation practices and avoid wasteful consumption of utilities and household supplies that could negatively impact community environmental goals. It was vague enough to be interpreted 1,000 different ways, which I am sure was intentional. I took a screenshot and emailed the HOA office, requesting a formal hearing to dispute the fine. Colorado law actually gave homeowners pretty decent rights when it came to challenging HOA decisions, and I intended to use every one of them. The response came 2 hours later from Deborah herself. She agreed to a hearing, but made it clear in her email that the fine stood, and I needed to immediately cease my excessive filter changing habits. Her tone was condescending, like she was explaining basic concepts to a child. I could practically hear her smug voice through the screen. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at 7 p.m. in the community center, which was really just a glorified rec room with folding tables and chairs that smelled like old carpet and disappointed dreams. I spent the weekend doing research, calling HVAC companies, and most importantly, keeping my dirty furnace filters. See, here is the thing nobody tells you about Colorado winters and newer construction homes. The air is incredibly dry. We get constant temperature fluctuations, and many of these planned communities were built with the cheapest materials contractors could legally use. My house, in particular, had issues with dust infiltration, probably because the ductwork installation was done by the lowest bidder who clearly did not care about proper sealing. I had noticed within the first winter that my furnace filters got dirty incredibly fast. We are not talking about a light gray coating. These filters would be completely black within 2 weeks, packed solid with dust, pet dander from the previous owners, and who knows what else. I had called an HVAC technician out during my first year, worried something was seriously wrong with my system. The tech, a guy named Roberto from Alpine Heating and Air, had spent 3 hours examining everything. He found several gaps in the ductwork where construction debris had prevented proper sealing, and the return air vent in the hallway had been installed incorrectly, pulling in air from the crawl space. He fixed what he could without tearing apart walls and recommended I change my filters every 2 to 3 weeks during winter, or risk damaging my furnace blower motor with restricted airflow. I had kept Roberto's report and his business card. Now, I give him a call. Roberto, this is Morrison from Boulder Creek. You did work on my house about a year ago, the one with all the ductwork issues. Oh yeah, I remember. That was a mess, builder quality work. How is everything holding up? The furnace is fine because I have been following your advice about changing filters frequently. But now, my HOA is fining me, saying I am changing them too often. Is there any way you could provide documentation or testimony about why frequent changes are necessary? Roberto was quiet for a moment. Are you serious? They are fining you for maintaining your HVAC system properly. That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard, and I have heard a lot of dumb things in this industry. Dead serious. I have a hearing Monday night. I will do you one better. I will show up in person if you want. This is the kind of thing that drives me crazy. People with no technical knowledge making decisions about technical systems. I have seen so many furnaces destroyed because people do not change filters enough, never too much. I could have hugged him. We arranged for him to attend the hearing, and he said he would bring documentation, industry standards, and photographs from his original service call. I also called 2 other HVAC companies and asked them to provide written statements about proper filter maintenance schedules, which they were happy to do. Monday evening arrived, and I showed up to the community center with a large cardboard box containing all 8 of my used furnace filters from the past 4 months, carefully preserved in individual garbage bags. The smell was going to be part of my presentation. I also had a folder with Roberto's original service report, the statements from the other HVAC companies, printouts of manufacturer recommendations, and documentation about my specific furnace model's requirements. The hearing room was set up with a long table at the front where Deborah sat with 2 other board members, Patricia Chen and Gordon Webb. About 15 other residents had shown up, probably hoping for some entertainment on a cold Monday night. Deborah was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president. She was 50-something with an asymmetrical haircut that definitely cost too much, expensive athleisure wear, and an expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. Which was ironic, given what I was about to show her. Roberto sat in the back row, giving me a thumbs up. He was still wearing his work uniform with the Alpine Heating and Air logo. Deborah called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel, which seemed excessive for an HOA hearing, but whatever. We are here to address the violation notice issued to Marcus Morrison of 4782 Meadowlark Drive regarding excessive and wasteful consumption of furnace filters. Mr. Morrison, you requested this hearing to dispute the fine. You have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood up and carried my box to the front of the room. Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate the opportunity to address this ridiculous accusation. Her eyes narrowed at the word ridiculous, but I continued. In the past 4 months, I have changed my furnace filter 8 times. The HOA has determined this is excessive. I am here to demonstrate exactly why this frequency is not only reasonable but absolutely necessary for my specific situation. I opened the box and pulled out the first garbage bag, unsealing it. The smell hit immediately, a musty, dusty odor that made several people in the audience wrinkle their noses. I carefully removed the filter and held it up. It was completely black, with the pleats packed solid with debris. This filter was in my furnace for exactly 2 weeks, I said. This is what it looked like when I removed it. I placed it on the table in front of Deborah, who leaned back in her chair, clearly disgusted. I pulled out the second filter, equally filthy. Then the third, fourth, and fifth. By the time I had all 8 filters displayed on the table, the room smelled like the inside of a vacuum cleaner bag, and Deborah was visibly uncomfortable. As you can see, these filters are completely saturated with dust and debris. According to every manufacturer recommendation, HVAC industry standard, and common sense, a filter this dirty needs to be replaced immediately. Continuing to run a furnace with a clogged filter restricts airflow, forces the blower motor to work harder, increases energy consumption, and can lead to expensive system failure. Patricia Chen, one of the other board members, was actually leaning forward to look at the filters. "Why are they getting so dirty so fast?" she asked. "Excellent question," I said, pulling out Roberto's report. "When I first noticed this problem, I hired a licensed HVAC technician to inspect my system. His report, which I am submitting as evidence, documents multiple issues with the ductwork installation, including improperly sealed joints, incorrect return vent placement, and construction debris in the ducts. These issues were present when I purchased the home and are the result of poor quality construction, which unfortunately is common in many planned communities built quickly to meet demand." I handed copies of the report to each board member. Deborah flipped through it dismissively, but Patricia was actually reading it carefully. The technician recommended changing filters every 2 to 3 weeks during winter months, or whenever they appeared dirty. I have been following professional advice to maintain my HVAC system and prevent damage to my furnace. I fail to see how following industry best practices constitutes a violation of HOA rules. Roberto stood up from the back. "If I may add something," Deborah looked annoyed. "And you are?" "Roberto Vasquez, owner of Alpine Heating and Air. I am the technician who performed the original inspection and wrote that report. I have been working in HVAC for 23 years, and I am a licensed contractor in Colorado. What Mr. Morrison is doing is exactly what he should be doing. If he did not change those filters regularly, he would end up with a failed blower motor, which costs about $1,200 to replace, not including labor." He walked to the front and pointed at the filters on the table. "Look at these. This level of contamination in 2 weeks indicates serious air quality issues, most likely from construction defects. The responsible thing to do, the thing that protects his property investment and maintains his heating system, is to change these filters frequently. Recommending anything else would be negligent." Deborah was not having it. "We have environmental guidelines in this community. Throwing away 8 filters in 4 months is wasteful and unnecessary. Most people change their filters twice a year." Roberto actually laughed. "Most people are ruining their HVAC systems and do not realize it until they face a major repair bill. The recommendation to change filters twice a year is outdated information that applied to older, less efficient filters from decades ago. Modern high-efficiency filters in homes with air quality issues should be changed monthly at minimum, sometimes more frequently. This is documented in literally every current industry standard. I pulled out more papers from my folder. I contacted 3 other HVAC companies and asked for their professional opinion on appropriate filter change frequency. I have written statements from all 3. Would you like me to read them? Patricia nodded. Deborah looked like she wanted to shut down the whole hearing, but Gordon Webb, the 3rd board member who had not spoken yet, said, "Yes, please read them." I read through each statement. All 3 companies recommended monthly filter changes at minimum, with more frequent changes necessary in homes with air quality issues, pet owners, or residents with allergies. One company specifically noted that in Colorado's dry climate with frequent dust, every 2 to 3 weeks was perfectly reasonable. Furthermore, I continued, I researched the environmental impact claim. These filters are standard fiberglass and cardboard construction. They can be disposed of in regular trash, and the environmental impact of 8 filters versus 4 filters per year is negligible. The real environmental waste would be if my furnace failed prematurely due to poor maintenance, requiring replacement of the entire unit, which would create far more waste and consume significantly more resources. Several audience members were nodding. One woman raised her hand. I have been changing my filters every month for years. Should I be worried about getting fined too? Deborah shot her a sharp look. We are not here to discuss your situation. Actually, I think we should, Gordon said. If we are going to enforce this policy on Marcus, we need to be clear about what we are expecting from all residents. And I have to say, after seeing these filters and hearing from a licensed professional, I am not sure we are on solid ground here. Patricia agreed. I change my filters every 6 weeks or so, but I also have never seen them look like that. If his system has documented issues causing excessive dust accumulation, then he is just dealing with a maintenance problem specific to his property. That is not a conservation issue. Deborah was getting flustered. The rule is clear. Excessive consumption of household supplies is against community guidelines. 8 filters in 4 months is excessive by any standard. Except it is not, I said. I have provided documentation from 4 different HVAC professionals stating this is appropriate and necessary. I have physical evidence showing why frequent changes are needed. I have manufacturer recommendations. What evidence does the HOA have that 8 filters in 4 months is excessive, other than someone's uninformed opinion? The room went quiet. Deborah shuffled papers on the table, clearly searching for something to support her position. She finally said, "Other homeowners have complained about seeing you throw away filters frequently. It gives the appearance of waste. So this is about appearances, not actual conservation. It is about community standards. Show me the standard that says how often I can change my furnace filter." She could not, because there was not one. The conservation clause was intentionally vague, designed to be interpreted by the board on a case-by-case basis, which meant it could be weaponized against anyone for virtually anything. Gordon cleared his throat. "Deborah, I think we need to table this and revisit the conservation clause language. We might need to consult with our attorney about whether this is an appropriate application of the rule." "We already consulted with our attorney," Deborah snapped. "She agreed that excessive consumption falls under the conservation clause. Did she see the documentation about the ductwork issues? Did she talk to any HVAC professionals about industry standards?" Deborah did not answer, which was answer enough. I pressed my advantage. I am requesting that this fine be immediately dismissed, and that the HOA board acknowledge in writing that my filter change frequency is appropriate and will not be subject to future violations. If this request is denied, I will be forced to pursue legal action against the HOA for harassment and for issuing fines based on arbitrary and unsupported standards. Deborah's face went red. Are you threatening this board? I am informing you of my rights as a homeowner. Colorado law is pretty clear about HOA overreach. I am happy to have a judge make this determination if the board is unwilling to act reasonably. Roberto added, I would also be happy to testify in any legal proceeding about the negligence of discouraging proper HVAC maintenance. That could open up liability issues if other homeowners follow bad advice and end up with system failures. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Deborah wanted to uphold the fine and accused me of being disrespectful to the board. Patricia and Gordon both argued that the fine should be dismissed. Several audience members chimed in with their own HOA grievance stories, turning the hearing into an impromptu therapy session about board overreach. Finally, after 40 minutes of arguing, Gordon moved to dismiss the fine pending further review of the conservation clause by the HOA attorney and a certified HVAC professional. Patricia seconded. Deborah was outvoted 2-1. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received another violation notice. This time, Deborah was citing me for improper trash disposal because my used furnace filters were creating unsightly waste in my trash bin on collection days. The fine was $300. I stood in my driveway, staring at the notice, and actually laughed. She was not going to let this go. This had become personal for her, and I realized I was dealing with someone who saw any challenge to her authority as a declaration of war. I called my attorney, a guy named Stephen Park, who I had worked with on my house closing. He specialized in real estate law and had dealt with HOA disputes before. Marcus, this is harassment, he said after I explained the situation. She is clearly retaliating against you for challenging the first fine. The trash disposal claim is ridiculous. Are you putting the filters in your regular trash bin? Yes, on collection day, exactly as required by the HOA trash policy. And there is nothing hazardous or illegal about disposing of furnace filters in regular trash. Nope. They are just fiberglass and cardboard, completely ordinary household waste, Stephen sighed. Okay, here is what we are going to do. We are going to send a formal letter to the HOA board documenting the harassment and demanding that all fines be permanently dismissed. We are also going to request copies of all communications about you from the past 6 months. If they have been discussing you in board meetings or emails, we have a right to see those records under Colorado's HOA transparency laws. Will they actually provide that? They have to, or they can face legal consequences. HOAs are not above the law, even though some board members seem to think they are. Stephen drafted a letter that was professional but firm, outlining my rights and the legal issues with the HOA's actions. He sent it via certified mail to ensure we had proof of delivery. The letter also requested a formal response within 14 days. Deborah responded in 11 days with a 6-page letter that was essentially a rant about entitled homeowners who think rules do not apply to them. She claimed I was being singled out because my behavior was uniquely problematic, not because of retaliation. She also denied that any harassment was occurring and stated that both fines stood. The letter concluded with a threat that if I continued to challenge the board's authority, additional fines and potential legal action would follow. Stephen read the letter and whistled. Wow, She really stepped in it. This letter actually helps our case because it demonstrates a pattern of unreasonable behavior and threats. We can use this. What is the next step? We file a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Regulatory Office, and we request access to all board communications about you. Then we prepare for either mediation or litigation, depending on how crazy they want to get. The records request came back 3 weeks later, and holy hell, it was illuminating. Deborah had been emailing the other board members about me for months, long before the filter incident. She had complained about my lawn being too green in summer, suggesting I was wasting water. She had questioned whether my car was parked at an acceptable angle in my driveway. She had even criticized the wreath I hung on my door during Christmas as being too large and gaudy, though she never sent me an official violation for any of these things. The filter issue had started when Deborah noticed my trash bin on collection day and saw a used filter on top of the other trash. She had apparently gone through previous weeks of trash collection photographs. Yes, she was photographing neighbors' trash bins and counted how many times she spotted filters over a 4-month period. Then she had pushed the other board members to support a violation based on the conservation clause. Gordon had actually pushed back in the emails, questioning whether this was an appropriate use of the clause and whether they should consult an HVAC professional before issuing a fine. Deborah had dismissed his concerns and insisted they had the authority to determine what constituted excessive consumption. Even better, Patricia had emailed Deborah after the hearing suggesting they drop the issue entirely and revise the conservation clause to be more specific. Deborah had responded with a long email about not letting homeowners bully the board and how important it was to maintain authority and set examples. Then came the smoking gun. After the first fine was dismissed, Deborah had emailed the board saying she was going to find another violation to issue because I needed to learn respect for the board. She literally wrote that she was looking for ways to fine me as retaliation. Stephen was ecstatic when he read that email. This is textbook harassment and retaliation. We have her dead to rights. I am going to file a lawsuit against the HOA and Deborah personally. This is so egregious that we can potentially hold her individually liable for her actions, not just the HOA as an organization. Is that normal? No. Usually board members have protection from personal liability if they are acting in their official capacity. But when they engage in harassment and retaliation this blatant, they step outside that protection. She was not trying to enforce legitimate rules. She was trying to punish you for challenging her. The lawsuit was filed in Boulder County District Court in early April. We sued for harassment, retaliation, violation of Colorado HOA statutes, and emotional distress. We requested dismissal of all fines, compensation for legal fees, and an injunction preventing further harassment. The HOA retained an attorney, a sharp woman named Rachel Torres, who took one look at the email records and apparently told Deborah she had been incredibly stupid. Rachel tried to negotiate a settlement before the case went any further, offering to drop all fines and pay my legal fees to date if I would drop the lawsuit. Stephen advised that we could probably push for more, given how strong our case was. But I was tired of dealing with this insanity, and I just wanted it over. We agreed to the settlement with one additional condition. Deborah had to resign from the HOA board and could not serve in any board position for at least 5 years. Rachel went back to her clients with that demand. According to Stephen, there was apparently a huge fight within the board. Deborah refused to resign and insisted they should fight the lawsuit. Patricia and Gordon both wanted to accept the settlement because they knew they would lose in court, and the legal fees would be paid from HOA funds, meaning all the homeowners would effectively be paying for Deborah's vendetta. An emergency board meeting was called, and homeowners were invited to attend. I went, curious to see how this would play out. The community center was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the lawsuit, and a lot of residents were unhappy about HOA funds being used to defend harassment. Deborah tried to control the narrative, claiming I was a problem homeowner who refused to follow simple rules and that my lawsuit was frivolous. Then, Gordon stood up and dropped a bomb. "I am resigning from the board effective immediately," he said. "I can no longer be part of an organization that uses homeowner funds to defend the indefensible. Deborah, what you did was wrong, and everyone in this room knows it. You had a personal vendetta against Marcus because he stood up to you, and now we are all going to pay for your ego." Patricia followed up. "I am also resigning unless Deborah steps down and we accept the settlement offer. This has gone too far. I have reviewed the email records, and what she did was harassment, plain and simple. If we do not accept this settlement and we lose in court, the judgment could be much worse. We could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees plus damages." The room erupted. Homeowners started demanding to see the evidence. Someone made a motion to hold an immediate recall vote on Deborah's position. The meeting descended into chaos. Deborah tried to maintain control, but she had lost the room. When the recall vote was finally held, she was removed by a margin of 43-7. She stormed out of the community center, yelling that we were all going to regret this and that the community would fall apart without her leadership. The new interim board, headed by Patricia as president, accepted the settlement offer the next day. All fines against me were dismissed. The HOA paid my legal fees, and a formal apology was issued. The conservation clause was also revised to remove vague language and instead provide specific, measurable standards based on actual resource consumption data. But the story does not end there. In June, I got a call from Roberto. "Hey Marcus, you are not going to believe this, but I am working at another house in Boulder Creek, and the homeowner told me Deborah is going around the neighborhood claiming you falsified documents and bribed board members. She is basically running a smear campaign." "Are you kidding me?" I wish I was. Apparently she has been hosting coffee meetings with some of the residents who voted against her recall, and she is trying to paint herself as the victim of a corrupt homeowner conspiracy. This was defamation, pure and simple. I called Stephen back. "Can we do anything about this?" I asked. "Technically, yes, but defamation cases are hard to prove and expensive to pursue. We would need documented evidence of her making false statements, and we would need to show that it caused you actual damages. Is she saying these things in writing anywhere? I do not know. She is apparently saying them in person at private gatherings. That makes it even harder. Unless she puts it in writing or says it in a public forum where we can document it, it is just hearsay." I was frustrated but decided to let it go. I had won the important battle. If Deborah wanted to waste her time bad-mouthing me to a handful of people who would still listen to her, that was her problem. Then in August, I came home from work to find my front door had been egged. Raw eggs were splattered across the door and the surrounding siding, already starting to bake in the summer heat. I cleaned it up and chalked it up to random teenage vandalism. 3 days later, it happened again. And then someone keyed my car while it was parked in my driveway overnight. That is when I installed security cameras. The cameras captured everything. On a Tuesday night at around 11:30, a silver Honda CR-V pulled up in front of my house. The driver got out, threw eggs at my front door, then got back in the car and drove away. The license plate was clearly visible on the footage. I ran the plate through a reverse lookup service online. The car was registered to Deborah Martinez. I called the police this time. A Boulder Creek officer named Deputy Ramirez came out to take my report. I showed him the security footage. "Yeah, that is pretty clear-cut vandalism," he said, making notes. "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely." "Do you have any idea why this person would be targeting your property?" I explained the whole HOA saga. Ramirez shook his head. "Man, I have dealt with HOA disputes before, but this is next level. She actually came back multiple times. At least twice that I caught on camera. I think she probably did it a third time before I installed the cameras." "Okay, I am going to follow up with her." Given the history and the evidence, we can definitely pursue charges for criminal mischief, maybe harassment too. Deputy Ramirez contacted Deborah the next day. According to the police report, she initially denied everything, but when confronted with the video evidence, she broke down and admitted to the vandalism. She claimed she was under extreme stress and that I had ruined her life by forcing her off the HOA board. She was charged with 3 counts of criminal mischief. Because there were multiple incidents, the prosecutor decided to take it seriously rather than dismissing it as a minor first offense. Deborah hired a defense attorney who tried to argue that she had been under emotional duress due to the stress of the lawsuit and board recall. Her attorney painted her as a dedicated volunteer who had been unfairly targeted and pushed to a breaking point. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Jennifer Walsh, was not sympathetic. "Your client engaged in a targeted harassment campaign against the victim over a period of months. She initiated baseless fines, retaliated when challenged, and then escalated to vandalism after facing consequences for her actions. This is not a moment of poor judgment. This is a pattern of behavior." I had to testify at a preliminary hearing in September. It was surreal sitting in a courtroom describing how an HOA dispute over furnace filters had escalated to criminal charges. The judge, an older man named Judge Patterson, seemed baffled by the whole situation. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said at one point. The defendant issued fines because the plaintiff was changing his furnace filters too frequently, and this eventually led to vandalism. "Yes, Your Honor," Jennifer Walsh confirmed. Judge Patterson looked at Deborah. "Madam, what were you thinking?" Deborah tried to explain that she had been trying to uphold community standards and that I had been disrespectful and undermined her authority. Judge Patterson cut her off. "None of that justifies vandalism. The appropriate venue for HOA disputes is civil court or mediation, not criminal activity. The charges will proceed to trial." Deborah's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. They offered to plead guilty to 1 count of criminal mischief in exchange for dismissing the other charges, with Deborah paying restitution and performing community service. Jennifer Walsh consulted with me about whether I would accept the plea. "It is your call," she said. "We can definitely win at trial with the video evidence, but trials take time and energy. The plea deal gets you restitution and ensures she has a conviction on her record." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to drag her through a full trial just to make a point, but another part of me just wanted this to be over so I could move on with my life. "What kind of community service are we talking about?" I asked. "Probably 80 to 100 hours, plus restitution for damages, which I estimate around $800 for cleaning and repairs. She would also be on probation for a year. And she would have a criminal record. Yes, a misdemeanor conviction for criminal mischief." That sealed it for me. I accepted the plea deal. Deborah pled guilty in October, and she was sentenced to 100 hours of community service, 1 year probation, and ordered to pay me $850 in restitution. The judge also issued a restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of my property. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Patterson addressed Deborah directly. "Madam, I have been on the bench for 18 years, and this is one of the most petty and vindictive cases I have seen. You allowed your ego and your need for control to escalate a minor dispute into criminal behavior. You are fortunate that Mr. Morrison agreed to the plea deal, because if this had gone to trial and you were convicted on all charges, you would be facing a much harsher sentence. I strongly suggest you take this as a wake-up call and examine your behavior." Deborah muttered something that might have been an apology, but she did not look at me. She left the courtroom with her attorney, and that was the last time I saw her. Life in Boulder Creek slowly returned to normal after that. The new HOA board, led by Patricia, took a much more reasonable approach to governance. They revised several outdated rules, established clear standards for violations, and actually started communicating with homeowners like adults rather than subjects to be controlled. I continued changing my furnace filters every 2 to 3 weeks. My HVAC system ran perfectly, and I never had any issues with my blower motor or heating efficiency. Roberto even stopped by a few months later to do a routine maintenance check and confirmed everything was working great. "You know, this whole thing probably saved you money in the long run," he said while inspecting my furnace. "If you had followed Deborah's advice and only changed filters twice a year, you would have wrecked your blower motor within 18 months. That would have been a $1,500 repair. Easy." The story spread through Denver's HOA community like wildfire. I heard from several people who lived in other planned communities that their boards had started revising their own conservation clauses after hearing about my case. Some HOA attorneys were apparently using my lawsuit as a cautionary example of what happens when boards overreach. A local news station even contacted me about doing a story on HOA overreach. The segment aired in November and featured interviews with me, Stephen Park, and Roberto. They showed the dirty furnace filters and explained the whole ridiculous saga. The story went viral locally and got picked up by a few national outlets. I got messages from people all over the country who had their own HOA horror stories. Some were funny, like the guy who got fined for having the wrong shade of white on his mailbox post. Others were genuinely concerning, like the elderly woman who was facing foreclosure because her HOA had fined her thousands of dollars for not mowing her lawn quickly enough after surgery. The attention was a little overwhelming, but it also felt validating. This was not just about me and my furnace filters. It was about a systemic problem with HOAs having too much power and not enough accountability. In December, I was invited to speak at a Colorado homeowners' rights seminar organized by a coalition of consumer advocacy groups. I told my story to about 200 people, mostly homeowners dealing with their own HOA disputes. The questions afterward went on for over an hour. One woman asked, "How did you stay sane through all of this? I am dealing with an HOA that is fining me for having a vegetable garden, and I feel like I am losing my mind. Honestly, there were times I wanted to just pay the fine and move on," I said. But I realized that giving in to unreasonable demands just encourages more unreasonable demands. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to get professional help from attorneys who specialize in HOA law. Most importantly, remember that you are not alone. There are thousands of homeowners dealing with similar issues. Another man asked, "Do you regret buying in an HOA community?" I thought about that. Sometimes, yeah, but I also learned a lot about standing up for myself and navigating bureaucratic nonsense. If I could go back, I would have done more research into the specific HOA before buying. Not all HOAs are terrible. Some are actually reasonable and focus on genuine community improvement. But there are definitely some that are run by petty tyrants who use the rules as weapons. Do your homework. As the year wound down, I reflected on the absurdity of the entire situation. I had moved to Boulder Creek looking for a nice, quiet place to live. Instead, I had ended up in a months-long battle over furnace filters that culminated in criminal charges and local news coverage. But there was a silver lining. The HOA was now run by reasonable people who actually cared about the community rather than just exerting control. Several problematic rules had been revised or eliminated. Homeowners felt more empowered to question decisions and participate in governance. And me. I became known as the furnace filter guy, which was weird, but I could live with it. In January, almost exactly a year after receiving that first yellow violation notice, I got a letter from Patricia in her capacity as HOA president. It was a formal notice informing all residents that the conservation clause had been completely rewritten with input from environmental experts and industry professionals. The new version focused on actual measurable impacts, like water consumption during droughts or excessive outdoor lighting, rather than vague standards that could be arbitrarily enforced. The letter also announced that the board was implementing new policies for issuing violations, including mandatory consultation with relevant experts before fining homeowners for technical issues, a formal appeals process, and regular audits of board decisions to prevent overreach. It was not perfect, but it was progress. I ran into Patricia at the grocery store in February. "Hey Marcus, how are things going?" she asked. "Good, pretty quiet. I appreciate the changes you guys have made to the HOA rules." "Well, we learned some valuable lessons." "Expensive lessons, but valuable. I am sorry you had to go through all that." "It worked out in the end. Is Deborah doing okay?" Patricia sighed. "She finished her community service, I heard. She is keeping a low profile. I think the whole experience really shook her. Her husband told someone at the gym that she has been seeing a therapist, trying to work through some control issues." "Good. I hope she gets the help she needs. For what it is worth, I do not think she is a bad person. She just got way too invested in the HOA role and lost perspective. It became her whole identity and she could not handle being challenged. I get it. I do not hate her. I just needed her to stop harassing me." We chatted for a few more minutes about neighborhood stuff and then went our separate ways. It felt good to have a normal, friendly conversation about the HOA without any drama or tension. Spring arrived, and with it came the annual HOA meeting where residents could vote on board positions and proposed rule changes. I attended, mostly out of curiosity. The meeting was well attended and surprisingly civil. Several residents thanked the board for the improved communication and more reasonable approach to enforcement. When it came time to vote on board positions, Patricia was re-elected as president. A couple of new members joined the board. Both seemed reasonable and engaged. No one tried to nominate Deborah or even mentioned her name. During the open forum section of the meeting, a man named Charles stood up. "I just want to say something about what happened last year with Marcus and the furnace filter situation. I think it was a wake-up call for all of us. We got complacent and let one person have too much unchecked authority. We need to stay vigilant and hold our board accountable, but we also need to support them when they are doing the right thing. The changes I have seen in the past few months give me hope that we can have an HOA that actually serves the community rather than controlling it." Several people applauded. It felt like a turning point. That summer, I decided to host a neighborhood barbecue. I invited about 20 people from nearby houses, including Patricia and Gordon. It was a beautiful June afternoon, and we grilled burgers and hot dogs while kids played in the sprinkler. Roberto stopped by since he lived in a nearby subdivision. "Man, this is nice," he said, accepting a beer. "A year ago, you were in the middle of that crazy HOA war, and now you are hosting neighborhood parties. Life is weird," I agreed. "Have you had to change any filters lately?" "Every 2 weeks, like clockwork. System is running perfectly," he laughed. "Good. Let me know if you ever need another inspection or maintenance." As the sun set and people started heading home, I stood in my backyard looking at my completely normal suburban house. It had been a wild year, but I had learned some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, knowing your rights, and not backing down from bullies, even when they have the backing of an HOA. My furnace filters were still getting dirty every 2 weeks, and I was still changing them regularly, exactly as I should be. And no one was giving me any grief about it. The following autumn, I got a text from Stephen Park, my attorney. "Hey, you will never guess who just called my office asking about suing their HOA." "Who?" "Deborah Martinez. Apparently her new HOA in Littleton is giving her problems about some landscaping choices." I almost dropped my phone. "You are joking." "Nope." I had to explain to her that due to our prior representation of you, I could not take her case. But the irony is amazing. Did she recognize the irony? She seemed completely oblivious. She was going on about how her HOA was being unreasonable and overstepping their authority. I bit my tongue so hard I almost drew blood. I shared that story with Jake over drinks that weekend. He laughed until he cried. Only Deborah could get into an HOA dispute after everything that happened. Some people never learn. "I kind of feel bad for her new HOA," I said. "They have no idea what they are dealing with. Maybe she learned her lesson and will be a model resident. Or maybe she will end up back in court. Either way, not my problem anymore." As another winter approached, I stocked up on furnace filters, buying them in bulk online like I always did. I had a nice supply in my garage, ready to swap out every couple of weeks as needed. My house stayed warm and comfortable, my energy bills were reasonable, and my HVAC system hummed along without any issues. I sometimes thought about that first yellow violation notice, and how such a small, stupid thing had spiraled into a legal battle and criminal charges. It seemed surreal in retrospect. But it also reminded me that sometimes you have to fight for common sense and basic reasonableness, even when it is exhausting and frustrating. The Boulder Creek HOA was in good hands now. Patricia and her board ran things efficiently and fairly. They had even started a quarterly newsletter with transparent reporting on finances, upcoming projects, and rule clarifications. It was not perfect, no HOA ever is, but it was functional and reasonable. I stayed involved as a regular homeowner, attending meetings when I could and voting on important issues. I was not interested in joining the board myself. That felt like tempting fate, but I appreciated having a voice in how the community was run. One evening in December, almost 2 years after the whole mess started, I was changing my furnace filter when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young couple standing on my porch. "Hi, are you Marcus Morrison?" the woman asked. "Yes, that is me. Can I help you?" "We are looking at houses in Boulder Creek, and our realtor mentioned you might be a good person to talk to about what it is like living here. We have some concerns about the HOA." I invited them in and spent about an hour answering their questions. I told them the whole story, not sugarcoating anything, but also explaining how things had improved. They listened intently, asked good questions, and seemed genuinely thoughtful about their decision. "So would you recommend buying here?" the husband asked. "I would say do your research. Read the HOA bylaws carefully. Attend a board meeting before you buy so you can see how they operate. Talk to multiple neighbors, not just the realtor, and make sure you understand your rights as a homeowner in Colorado. If you do all that and you still feel good about it, then yeah, it is a nice community." They thanked me and left. I hoped they made the right choice for them, whatever that was. As I finished installing the new furnace filter and disposed of the dirty one, I realized something. That filthy filter in my hand represented more than just dust and debris. It represented standing up for yourself, fighting against arbitrary authority, and refusing to accept unreasonable demands. It was just a furnace filter, but it had become a symbol of something bigger. And every time I changed one, which was still every 2 weeks like clockwork, I smiled a little bit, because I knew that somewhere in Littleton, Deborah Martinez was probably arguing with her new HOA about something equally ridiculous, having learned absolutely nothing from our experience. But that was her journey to figure out. Mine was over. I had won, and my furnace ran beautifully.